Hi, I'm Katherine Paterson, and this is my dog Pixie. And as you'll see, both Pixie and I need to go to the beauty parlor badly, but I can't cut her hair, and she's refusing to cut mine, so we're stuck. But we're very glad to see you this afternoon, and I I think we're going to stay on, and I can answer a few questions afterwards. But I thought I'd start with a question that I seem to be asked every single time I talk to young people. Now, can you guess what that question might be? Well, I can't hear you if you're guessing, so I'll just go ahead and tell you. The question I seem to always get is, where do you get your ideas? Now, I'm not one of these people with lots of ideas. I have friends who have so many ideas, they're never going to live long enough to write books on all those ideas. But I'm not one of those. I finished a book and I think, well, that was a nice career while it lasted, but I'll never write another book. Now, my husband, who is not with us any longer, and my children, all just roll their eyes when they say that, because they know that I'll probably write another book. But anyhow, I ask people where they get their ideas, and they give me all kinds of places. And I think, well, that's where I get my ideas. And I was asked about this when I was in New Zealand, and I think it must have been about 1998, which is a long time ago. But a gentleman had asked me to write a story about what I thought the future was going to be like. He was going to make a collection of stories from writers and call it Tomorrowland. And we were supposed to guess what the future was going to be like. Well, I said, I write contemporary stories or historical fiction. I don't write future stories. And he said, well, just give it a try. Well, I hadn't, because I didn't have any ideas whatsoever. But I was in New Zealand, and I was staying at a hotel, and somebody was going to pick me up to take me over to a school later. But I had finished my breakfast and got my clothes on, and I just wandered over the window and looked out. It was a beautiful day. And a man came driving a tractor to mow this huge grassy plot in front of the windows that I was staring out of. I don't know if it was supposed to be an athletic field or something, but it was perfectly square. And he started taking the tractor up and down to mow it perfectly. And behind the tractor, following one of the wheels of the tractor, was this little dog. And the dog, when the man would turn to go back, the dog would turn and keep on following the wheels. And I thought, well, that dog must belong to the man who owns the tractor. And I watched, and the whole time the man was mowing the lawn, and the little dog would very obediently follow the tractor and get to the end of the road. They'd turn around and come back. And I was just fascinated by the little dog. And I thought, well, what a lucky man to have a dog that loves him so much. And our dog had died, and we didn't have a dog, and I was missing my dog. So I was loving that little dog and wishing that I could take that little dog home with me, because I had a house with no dog in it. I don't like to have a house with no dog. So the man finished the lawn, and he started driving his tractor out the one side of the plot. And I thought the little dog would trip along behind him, but the little dog didn't trip along behind him. The little dog just went over to the opposite side of the lot, raised his leg, and did his business, and then trotted out in an entirely different direction. Well, I just started laughing. Who was that funny little dog? And why was he following that man? And where did he come from? Where was he going? And so that morning I got picked up and I went to the school, and someone invariably asked, where do you get your ideas? And I said, well, I get them wherever I can. Now, just this morning, I was looking out the window of the hotel and I told him the story of the little dog. And I said, you know, maybe somebody should write a story about that little dog. And I came home and I thought, okay, I'm missing having a dog. I fell in love with that little dog that I'll never see again. What would the world be like if there were no more dogs? And I thought, what a dismal world that didn't have any dogs in it. And I began to write a story called The Last Dog, in which a boy leaves the safe dome that people have built to keep them from having to go out into the poisonous atmosphere of the earth. And he decides that he will go out and explore the outside world. He's sort of frowned upon for this because people don't just go out and explore, and he has to wear this sort of space suit because they're sure the atmosphere is poisoned. And all of a sudden on his trip, he hears this little whimpering. And you guessed it, he finds the last dog. Well, I wrote the story. It was published in the book. The book is long ago out of print. But somehow, The Last Dog does not go out of print. People are writing to my agent all the time and saying, we'd like to republish a story that Mrs. Paterson wrote many years ago called The Last Dog. And sure enough, they pay good money to publish once again the story of The Last Dog, which just proves me not that I had a wonderful idea, but how much everybody loves dogs. So anyhow, that's how I got one idea. Now, you examine that. The little dog in my actual life was nothing like the dog in my story. There was no little boy standing at the window looking at the little dog. And that's what you do with an idea. You change it and fit it to make it work into a story. Sometimes I just get a sort of a idea in my head. I don't know quite where it comes from. And I got this sort of picture in my head of a little boy falling off the back of a wagon and nobody comes to look for him. But what? How would such a thing happen? You know, I have 4 children, 2 of them are boys, and I have to watch them all the time because if they were on a wagon, they might fall off any time because they're always climbing trees and jumping off things where they're not now, but when they were small. But if I turned around and realized that I was missing a child or 2, I can't imagine not going back and hunting them down and not doing anything else until I actually found the missing child. So how could this be that a child would fall off the back of a wagon and nobody would come back to look for him? And I worried about it, and I worried about it, and I worried about it. And that's kind of how stories hatch sometimes. You've just got something just niggling at you and you don't know what caused it or where it came from, but you got to figure out something about it. You can't write a story and just say a child fell off the back of a wagon and nobody came back to look for him. The end, you've got to figure out how that happened in the first place and what's going to happen to the child that's left there in the middle of the road, and who is he going to meet, and what adventures is he going to face, and how will it all end? And I couldn't start because I didn't know what the beginning of the story was or the middle or the end. I just had this one lone picture. And then one morning I woke up and I realized why that had happened. And I think you'd think I'd just be thrilled that I finally knew why this little boy had fallen off the wagon. But when I figured out why, or it just sort of dawned on me, the only possible explanation, I was kind of furious because I wanted to write a great adventure story And it's going to be a story with a lot of sadness in it. And people were always accusing me of writing sad stories ever since I wrote Bridge to Terabithia. And so I wasn't really anxious to write a sad story. And there is a lot of adventure in it. There's some funny things in it. But I realized that was the only possible reason. So I had to go ahead and move from that point into the whole story of the people he meets and where he is taken care of and what happens to him. So that's another story. And I'm not the one watching the clock, so I'm not quite sure how much time I've taken. I don't know if I'm supposed to talk some more and talk about another story, or if I'm just supposed to wait and answer your questions. So I think you'll, if you have some questions, maybe they'll share them with me and I can answer them. Are we ready for questions? What is the happiest story you've ever written? Oh, well, after I wrote Bridge to Terabithia, I was just sure that I wanted to write a funny story because people like funny stories. I like funny stories. Now, that's not necessarily a happy story, but most funny stories are happy stories, aren't they? And so I began writing The Great Billy Hopkins. And I was writing it, and I was finishing it while we were on vacation up at Lake George. And I was sitting on the beach that afternoon. I'd given the book to my husband to read because he was always the first reader. And he didn't come to the beach, and he didn't come to the beach, and he didn't come to the beach. And I thought, what in the world? And then I saw him coming from a long way off, and I could tell by the way he was walking that something terrible had happened. And when he got close enough for me to yell at him, I said, John, what's wrong? And he said, I've been reading your story. And I said, but that's my funny story. I said, well, you're going to have to do something about it. So I thought, well, I better read it out loud to my children because it's supposed to be a funny story. And I was reading it, and there was 4 of them sitting there laughing their heads off. And then over in the back corner was my husband sitting with tears rolling down his cheeks. So who knows if I can write a funny story or not. But one of the happiest times I ever had writing a story was a book called Come Sing Jimmy Joe. And I wrote it for a peculiar reason. I wrote it because it was just after Bridge to Terabithia had been published. And once that book was published, people started treating me funny. They would come up and they'd say, well, I'm not scared to speak to you because what? Because I hadn't changed. I was the same person I'd been the day before. And then I would be speaking at a banquet, and I'd be introduced to the person sitting on either side of me, and they would say, hello, Mrs. Paterson. You wrote a wonderful book. And then they would turn and talk to the person on either side of them and never speak to me again. And I'd go home and I'd say to my husband, I'd say, what is the matter with people? Why don't they just treat me like a human being? I'm just a human being. And then I remembered, and memory is a great place if you're looking for stories and ideas. I remembered when I was in middle school, well, they called it junior high school in those days, in Richmond, Virginia. I'd come late in the year to the class, and at that school, they put all the kids who'd come from someplace else and were new to the school in the same homeroom, which was kind of nice because we could make friends with each other because everybody else would have already had their friends for a long time. But there was one girl in the class that shy around, and we didn't really talk to her much. But she had been, her name was, well, she had a very famous name. And her name was Anita Carter. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Carter sisters, but June Carter married Johnny Cash. And the Carter sisters were very famous in those days. And they would sing on the radio, and they would sing in the stadium, and everybody would go to hear them. And Anita was part of the Carter sisters. She was the youngest sister, but she was one of the singers, and she had a wonderful yodel that she was famous for how beautifully she could yodel. Well, I was asked to tutor her because she'd moved around so much. She was a little behind in something. I'm sure it wasn't math. Nobody would ask me to be a math tutor, but I was supposed to be helping her with some of her work. And she was so shy that she would hardly speak above a whisper. And I thought, boy, if it's hard for me when I have a little bit of fame, when people treat me funny, how hard must it have been for Anita, as shy as she was? And so I'm very sympathetic with people who are very shy, but who actually, paradoxically, love to show off. So I'm a kind of a shy show off. So I wrote a book about a shy show off who belongs to a country music singing family. His name is James Johnson, and he even gets his name changed to Jimmy Joe, which he doesn't like very much. And I had so much fun writing that book. It was, I mean, it's not happy all the time, but I just felt like I was singing all the way through. It was just so much fun. I'm going to try not to make my answer so hard. Is it hard to be famous now? I don't even think about it. I mean, who cares? And I remember my kids used to say, they never heard of you and you're famous. I said, they're not famous if they've never heard of me. So I'm famous in a very small world, a world where people know about children's books. And that's a very comfortable place to be. And I really like people, even if I am a little bit shy. And I've worked on that a lot because you can't just go sneaking off into a corner if you're going to be making people feel good about themselves. You have to treat them like human beings. And everybody likes to be treated like a human being. And so I used to, when I'd go to a party or a publisher's party or something, I'd sort of stand in the corner and wait for somebody to come speak to me. And very often, not many people did. But then I thought, well, there are plenty of people here who feel uncomfortable. I should go find somebody that looks uncomfortable and strike up a conversation, ask them about themselves. So it's, I don't care now. I'm 87 years old and I've been out at this for a long time. I love to write. I love it when people love my books. And let's just say I'm much more relaxed now. I'm looking to see if anybody else dares ask me a question. I'll try not to talk so long. Well, I hope, that maybe by next year we'll all be able to go back to Farmville for the wonderful Virginia Children's Book Festival, because I had so much fun there. Which is my favorite? Oh, I can tell you easily who is my favorite character. Mamie Trotter in Come Sing Jimmy Joe. And I just love Mamie Trotter. And I think it's because the one time I was asked to be a foster mother, I really flunked. I didn't, and the reason I flunked was I had to think about it. Why am I not a good foster mother? I've got 4 kids, 6 kids, what's the difference? And then I realized what I was saying in my head. I was saying, oh, they're going to be gone soon. Or thank goodness they're going to be gone soon. And I was treating two human beings as though they were disposable. And human beings are not disposable. And I was so ashamed. And so I thought I'd write a story about not one, but two foster kids and give them the best foster mother in the world. And I hope you've seen the movie of the great Billy Hopkins, because Kathy Bates plays Mammy Trotter, and she just does such a beautiful job of it. I just, even though Mammy Trotter's my favorite character, I can't think of her anymore without thinking of her the way Kathy Bates portrayed her. I wrote Bridge to Terabithia, and I've told the story many times over the last 43 years now since it was published, because my son David's best friend, who was a girl named Lisa Hill, was struck and killed by lightning. And I couldn't make any sense of that for my son. And I couldn't make any sense of it for myself. What a horrible thing. Why would, on a day when nobody thought that lightning was anywhere near, should a bolt of lightning come from the sky and kill one happy little girl? But I know that even though sometimes life just doesn't make sense, that a story has to make sense, because it has a beginning and a middle and an end. And when you get to the end somehow makes sense of the beginning and the middle. And so I began to write a story about a friendship between a boy and a girl. And I knew when I started that the girl was going to die. So when I got to the chapter, when I knew Leslie Burke was going to die, I stopped writing, because the only way I could keep her alive was not to write. But a friend said to me, because she knew I had cancer that year, when I told her that I didn't think I could write the story because I couldn't face Lisa's death, she said, I don't think it's Lisa's death you can't face. I think it's yours. So I thought, if it's my death, then I have to face it. So I wrote the next chapter with sweat pouring down my arms and mailed it off to my editor, Virginia Buckley, before I had a chance for the sweat to evaporate. As soon as I did it, I knew what a horrible mistake was. And I thought, well, she's going to tell me that whatever talent she thought I had is gone, and she's never going to edit another book of mine. Instead, she called me up and she said, is this a book about friendship or a book about death? And I said, up until that moment, I had thought it was a book about death. And then I said, oh, it's a book about friendship. And she said, then you need to go back and write it that way. And she said, you know, in a real friendship, both friends will change and grow because they know each other. I can see how Jess is changing because he knows Leslie, but I don't see Leslie changing. How is knowing Jessie going to change her life? And it was at that time that I remembered Pansy, the bully who scared the life out of me when I was a very frightened fourth grader at Calvin H. Wiley Elementary School. And I said, Pansy, I'm going to get my revenge. I'm going to put you in my book. But of course, by the time I had changed Pansy into Janice Avery and put her into my book, I begun to feel sorry for her. I don't know why Pansy was a bully, but people aren't born bullies. So I had to figure out why Janice was a bully. And when I found out, first I felt sorry for her, and before I was through, I kind of liked her. So it ruined my revenge, but it made it a better book, I think. What are some of your favorite books that you've read? Oh my goodness. I read all the time, and I have a long time having trouble. I have a real hard time having trouble remembering all the favorite books. When I was very tiny, of course, my mother read to me all the time, and she read all the A.A. Milne books. Now we are six. When we were very young, those were the poems, and House at Pooh Corner, Winnie the Pooh. Oh, all of those books. And she read me stories of Robert Louis Stevenson and his poems too, and Kenneth Grahame, The Wind in the Willows. Then the book that I remember that I read myself that meant so much to me was The Secret Garden. And it's a wonderful book. I still love that book very much. And then when I was 11, I think it was, there were 5 children in my family, and we shared all of our books. But my mother gave me a book just for me. She somehow knew that it was going to be a special book in my life. I don't know how she knew that, but the book was called The Yearling. And it was about a boy in the Florida Everglades who makes a pet out of a pet deer. I love that book. And I had a little mongrel dog at the time, not nearly as cute as Bixie, but I love that dog. And I used to play in the woods behind the house we were living in at the time, and he would be Flag the deer. Okay, you can go, Pix. You've been very good, very patient. And I look at the books that I've written, especially maybe Bridget Terabithia, and I think, boy, I can see the echoes of The Yearling in that book. It certainly influenced what I've written. Then, oh boy, among today's readers, there's so many great writers. I was just thinking about Kate DiCamillo. I've been happy to have written any book that she wrote. If it had my name on it, I'd be very proud. And then Jason Reynolds, who's our current National Ambassador for Children's Literature, wonderful writer. And I haven't read any of his books that I didn't think were really great. There's so many good writers. And if I start naming them, Stephanie Toland's a good friend of mine. She wrote a book called Listen, which is also about a child who has a very beloved dog, but that dog is a wild dog and she has to tame it. There are just so many great writers. You're so lucky because you have all these books yet to read. So don't stop reading. And here you are stuck at home. Maybe I hope you have some way of getting books. And because this is a good time to read. I'm just reading all the time now that I'm confined to my apartment. I'm very happy to have all this time to read. People say, are you stir crazy? Are you bored? I think, how could I be bored? I have all these books I want to read. How do I remember? Well, I still have that child inside of me. I've never lost touch with that child. I don't, there are a lot of things that have happened to me in my life that are very fuzzy memories, but I have I think a very good memory of how things felt to me. And which of course makes me argue with my sisters a lot because they say, oh, well, that's not the way things were. Well, it probably wasn't exactly the way things were, but it was the way things felt to me. And that's very helpful if you're writing, because feelings are a very important part of what makes a book matter to a reader. Oh, I'd love to come back and see you. Yes. Uh, I, I, I went to Farmville last year, sort of hesitantly, but I lived in Virginia off and on for good parts of my life, and I thought, well, I love Virginia. I think I should go back and visit Virginia. And I mean, I got kind of scared when Ms. Giles told me how many children I'd be talking to at once, but it was such great audiences, and the children were really prepared, and I really had one of the best times I've ever had at a festival. And so I'm always recommending it to other people. And they said, well, how do I get an invitation? So I think I better write down names of people that really want to be invited to meet you all. So you are a great audience. Did you know that? Seriously. My screen thinks I've been on this long enough. Where do I live now? I live in Montpelier, Vermont. Now, I've lived in Vermont since 1986. So that's a good bite of my life in Vermont. But I lived in Barrie for most of that time. And then my husband died, and I lived in a big 1830s farmhouse, which was really too big for one person and one small dog. And I was getting older, and I knew my children didn't want to have to empty out that house after I died. So I thought it's better for me to move while I can make the decisions myself. And I don't want my children to hate me after I'm dead and they see all the junk that I never threw away that I should have thrown away. So I did a big clean out, and my son David brought a dumpster that was the size of a railway car. Oh, I thought, mercy on us. Do I have that much junk to get rid of? Well, apparently I had a lot. And so I moved to I call it an old folks home, but my children think that's terrible. They say you're supposed to say retirement community. Well, it is a nice community. Right now, we can't see each other because we're all under COVID-19 isolation rules, because old folks are supposed to be the most vulnerable population. And so we're not supposed to even get close to any of our friends. And instead of eating in our nice dining hall, we get our dinners delivered in little boxes outside our door, which leaves a little something to be desired. But it's still, even in this very tricky time in which we're living, it's still a good place to live. What is your one piece of advice would you give to young writers? Well, of course, what I usually say is read, read, read. And because that's how I learned how to be a writer. I didn't write a lot when I was a child. Most of my friends who were writers wrote all the time when they were children, and they knew they were going to be writers. I didn't write when I was a child. I mean, I wrote a couple of things that were terrible, but I read all the time, and I learned, I got a decent vocabulary, and I learned about the rhythm of our beautiful language, and I learned how to put a sentence together, and how to put a paragraph together, and how to put a story together, because I read a lot of good stories. So that's how I learned. Now some people are fortunate enough to go to, if I may put in an ad for the Vermont College of Fine Arts, where I'm on the board of trustees. They have a terrific writing program for people who want to write for children and young adults. And people go there who have stories they want to tell, but they want to tell them in the best way possible. And they have teachers there that know how to help them shape a story. so that it will speak to other people. And so that it's possible to have somebody help you write. But I wasn't lucky enough. And so I just learned the hard way. Oh, I love you too. And I'm thrilled to be with you today. And I hope we can meet again face to face before too long. Thank you so much.